Also continues to downplay concerns about the rising cost of gas.
How much longer will Americans continue to see these high gas prices?
Well, they're not very high. If you look at what they were supposed to be in order to get rid of a nuclear weapon with the danger that entails. So the gas prices have come down very much over the last 3-4 days. I know, that's what ABC says. But the fact is that if you look at the stock market's up, everything's doing really well.
No, that's what the numbers say, not just ABC. The president's comments. The latest data from AAA shows gas prices have risen 49% since January, and a gallon of regular is nearly $1 more than it was this time last year, $4.08 a gallon. A new Quinnipiac University poll finds 65% of registered voters either blame Trump a lot or some for the recent rise in gas prices. He can try to wish this away, Joe, but gas is way too expensive. Life is way too expensive. It's something that this White House has not been able to get him to focus on or take seriously. Every time they do an affordability event, he mocks the idea as some kind of a left-wing hoax. And there again yesterday, he's right that the market is up lately, but that's not helping somebody trying to fill up their tank or go through the grocery line today.
Yeah, and it's just not where his focus is right now. His focus is on Iran. It was on Venezuela before. I mean, I think he's seeing himself as a president whose legacy is going to be reshaping the world and getting rid of dictators. But yeah, for working Americans who are going to be voting this fall, they are going to be focused on costs, the chaos that's going on, and probably corruption. Let's bring right now former U.S. Senator and an MS Now political analyst, Claire McCaskill, also senior writer at The Dispatch and a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, David Drucker. David, how are Republicans on the Hill balancing right now two competing interests, really? If you're a Republican politician, you want to see Iran's nuclear program either negotiated away or blown to bits. You also want to get reelected in the fall if you're in a swing district or if you're running for Senate. Obviously, the affordability crisis has been with us now for a very long time. And gas prices of over $4 a gallon is impacting working Americans every single day in a very meaningful, difficult way, and other products, as we all know. So how do Republicans balance that? Where does this go? How much longer will Donald Trump allow gas prices to be over $4 when he's balancing that with having to strike a deal with Iran on terms that might not be favorable to the United States?
Yeah, I mean, really good questions there. I mean, first of all, gas prices are going to remain high through the fall, right? I mean, if you talk to economists about how this stuff works, they'll refer to it as the rockets and feathers theory. This stuff will shoot up like a rocket, if you will, when there's global instability or whatever is causing the price shock. But even if you can deal with the events that cause the price shock, it takes a long time for gas prices to drift back down. So this war could end today. The president could announce a deal today. Gas prices are not coming down next week or the week after, and they're probably going to remain high through the fall. They'll start to relax a little in the summer, but they're still going to be high. So that's a problem Republicans are just going to have to deal with. And what we're beginning to see, Joe, on Capitol Hill is frustration among congressional Republicans in that sense that they're starting to look over their shoulder. You know what happens in when one party is under fire in a midterm campaign. You know, it starts to become an every man for himself, looking over your shoulder sort of thing. And I think we're beginning to see that with difficulties in passing this FISA extension that the president wants. He's not getting what he wants out of Republicans on the Hill, right? We already, saw a rebellion around the Epstein files, and Republicans are starting to sort of subtly but openly communicate, we need to get back to affordability. We need to get back to the economy. We're beginning to hear that from Senator John Thune, the majority leader, and he has been very careful to not pick fights with the White House. And, what we're hearing from Thune lately is sort of Midwestern John Thune speak for enough of this already. We need to get back to what voters sent us here to do. And that's really the problem Republicans are having, is that the number one thing that voters overlooked any problems they may have had with Trump in the past, but sent him back to the White House to do, was to bring about a pre-COVID pandemic economy. And not only, has he not done that in the eyes of voters, notwithstanding our resilient markets, and they are resilient, but prices are now, higher post-war or since the war started in late February than they were before. But people weren't even satisfied before the war started.
And David, to your point about Leader Thune wanting to move past the nonsense, when he was asked about the dust-up between the president and the Pope, he tried to pivot away, saying, look, we should be talking about the economy right now. That's what voters care about. So that shows you where he is focused. Let's dive into the poll a little bit more. This is an interesting breakdown here, David, about the Trump coalition, about who's for the war, who's not. Nearly 60% of Trump voters still support the war, although usually Trump voters are with him 80, 90% on things. So that in itself is telling. Those who are for it, MAGA hardliners, the anti-woke conservatives, while mainline Republicans, the reluctant right, and interestingly, Gen Z Trump voters, all very much against this. These are groups within, he made real inroads in 2024. So tell us more about this, but also what it could mean for other Republicans who, unlike Trump, are on the ballot this fall.
Right. So I really like the data from the More in Common Research Initiative. I've been using it a lot. And what they have been examining and tracking is not necessarily, what we think of as these are Republican voters that are going to show up in Republican primaries, but they've been looking at the Trump coalition, right? And so much has been made about the 2024 coalition because of how impressive it was and how much sort of broader it was than the coalition that sent Trump to the White House in 2016. But here we see over the Iran war and other issues, the beginning of some real attrition, right? And when we're looking ahead to 2028 and what might Republicans try to do to hold the White House, we can see that there are some real challenges. And of course, without Trump on the ballot in 2026, some challenges still. Look, the one thing that I look at here, as you said, younger voters, only 34% of Gen Z Trump voters support the war. And then a lot of them think that the president's using it as a distraction, so they don't even see a legitimate purpose for it. And that is true of other elements of the Trump coalition, whether you're looking at mainline Republicans or what these pollsters refer to as the reluctant right. And there's a lot in that coalition that sort of voted with Trump because they did not like the alternatives. I will say, and this is really interesting in and of itself, the voters who describe themselves as committed MAGA voters or even anti-woke conservatives still give Trump some of his strongest numbers on the war. So that's something of interest.
Yeah, Claire, it's a vexing question, really, for Democrats. You look at the numbers, and Donald Trump's numbers are bad. Traditionally, historically bad. The Republicans' numbers, historically bad. Republicans in Congress numbers are historically bad. You know where I'm going here. Democrats' numbers, Democrats' brand, even worse. Now, that doesn't mean they're not doing better and they're not going to win the midterms. It doesn't mean they're not raising a heck of a lot of money because we just got the first quarter filings in, and my gosh, there's from Texas to Alaska, Democrats are doing much better than expected. I want you, as somebody that ran in Missouri and won Senate races in Missouri, and understand how to win in a purple, now red state. What do Democrats need to do on their brand to turn these numbers around, so people aren't saying, I can't stand the Republicans, but of course I'll never vote for a Democrat?
Well, first of all, if you dive into those numbers, Joe, some of those really negative numbers for the Democratic Party are coming from within the House. The frustration among Democrats that we could not do better. There's this, people don't like the cruel reality of math. and they want more to happen against Donald Trump. They want us to fight harder against Donald Trump. And it's very hard when you don't have majorities to do the things that many in the Democratic Party are longing for. So a lot of that disapproval of Democrats is coming from Democrats, which is somewhat unusual. If you take that out of the equation, we are in about the same shape as Republicans right now, which is most people in America that aren't paying really close attention like we are, think the whole group is failing in terms of sticking to their knitting and caring about the things that American families care about. So that's my message to Democrats. Stay focused like a laser on the things that people are worried about: their healthcare costs, their food costs, their fuel costs, the cost of higher education, the ability of their kids to get a job. If they just stick to that and try to keep it local, they're going to be fine. I mean, look at that election last night in New Jersey, Joe. We had a special election in New Jersey, and this should send a cold chill down the spine of Mike Lawler and other Republicans that are trying to straddle the Trump fence. The guy running as a Republican in a district that Harris won by 8 really tried to distance himself from Trump. Said, you know, I'm not going to be with Trump. I disagree with him on J6. I disagree with him on this. And you know what the Democrat won by last night? 33 points.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is really something that's happening on the ground that they may not like the idea of the Democratic Party, but they sure can't wait to vote to get the Republicans out of power in Washington.
You know, Mika, Claire brings up such a great point. When I first ran in 94, I was running. Bill Clinton was unpopular in 94. And the Democrat I ran against spent half of his time running away from Bill Clinton. And it was just so easy. Okay, wait a second. Wait. So are you for Bill Clinton or are you against? Wait, you're going to go up to Washington as a Democrat and you're going to be fighting your own. Wait, I don't understand. And of course, what happens, as Claire said, it's so important that when you have politicians whose president's in the same party and they're running for Congress and they're trying to do two things at once, distance themselves from their president in their party while getting elected in a swing district, it's just an impossible task. It doesn't happen. And what happens instead is you have routes like happened last night where, again, in a fairly tight district, you have Democrats winning by 30-plus points.
I mean, to an extent, for Democrats, it's like, okay, politically, Republicans, just keep doing what you're doing because that's going to be helpful to us in the midterms, except for the part where it's so consequential, the war in Iran and the pulling away from NATO and the changes on the geopolitical landscape that could have lasting consequences long after Trump has been president.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's getting more difficult. And you look, David Ignatius this morning. David Drucker has a great column in the Washington Post, and he's talking about the fact that Vladimir Putin is cornered. Vladimir Putin is weakened, and that makes Vladimir Putin more dangerous because Donald Trump, as far as Vladimir Putin and Zelensky are concerned, Trump is siding with Vladimir Putin. And this war probably could have been over, and negotiations could have been settled between the two, and there could be peace there. But the fact that Trump keeps attacking Zelensky and keeps trying to defend Vladimir Putin. And David Ignatius warns that now, you look at what Russian leaders are saying around Putin, the rest of Europe is next. And so it's going to be very interesting. We're all talking about Iran right now, while Donald Trump continues to savage NATO, the most successful coalition in the history of mankind. He savages NATO because he can't get Greenland. It's causing a lot of concern in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, in Poland, in Germany, all across Europe.
Yeah, what's really been fascinating to me, Joe, or it's sort of bizarre, although, if you follow Trump, it's not surprising, is that the approach he had with Israel and Hamas was to give Israel all the support that it wanted and felt it needed from the United States. And they were able to get to a place where the war in Gaza ended. And at least in that part of the Middle East, tensions calmed, right? And there have been negotiations since. And yet, when it came to the Russia-Ukraine war, instead of siding with an American ally and helping them repel the invasion, he sides with the aggressor, and so the war continues. And the ripple effects of that and the badgering of NATO and attempts to take over Greenland is fracturing the alliance. And I don't know if Americans are prepared for a world in which we are less influential, because what other countries are doing, as much as they hope we remain in NATO, and we will remain in NATO because there won't be a 67 vote threshold to outlaw the treaty, to undo the treaty, but it's causing countries to look elsewhere and to rely less on American leadership. And there is a economic and geopolitical benefit to the U.S. being in charge of the rules of the road. Many Americans have been frustrated with the investment that necessitates, but there's so much benefit that we reap. And I don't know if we're prepared as a country for the economic and geopolitical challenges that come with the U.S. being viewed as just some other power. And I think we're going to have to see where we are at the end of the Trump administration, but also what the two candidates running to replace him ultimately in the next general election are offering in regard to the problems that have been created over the last year and a half.
Yeah, Willie, these people that are striking out against Ukraine, they're in their own echo chamber. They're in their far-right MAGA echo chamber, because the majority of the Americans are for the freedom fighters. They are for the people who got invaded by Vladimir Putin. They are for the country whose children have been kidnapped by Vladimir Putin systematically and taken to Russia. Children stripped away from their parents' arms and taken to Russia. They're actually against the war criminal and for the country, again, that's fighting for their very life. And yet you see, and again, this is going to sound so terrible when we get a little bit of distance and a little bit of space from this administration. J.D. Vance actually said in Georgia, that half empty or maybe three-quarter empty stadium a couple of days ago in Georgia, that one of the things he was proudest of the Trump administration is that they provided aid and comfort to Vladimir Putin. Not his words, mine, but it's exactly what they're doing, providing aid and comfort to Vladimir Putin by stripping funding from the freedom fighters, by stripping funding from the country whose children have been kidnapped, by stripping funding from the country that has been savaged by Russian invaders over the past 3-4 years. It's just extraordinary that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and people that are in Ronald Reagan's party side with Vladimir Putin and do everything they can to help Putin defeat Ukraine. It's again, if people think that's where the American people are, they need to look at a poll, because that's not where Americans are.
Yeah, at some point, maybe with that same distance, too, we'll finally have clarity on why, time and again, for more than a decade now, President Trump has always leaned toward Vladimir Putin, and in this case, away from Zelensky, who's, by the way, offering his help in the United States war with Iran on drone technology. And J.D. Vance just last week was in Hungary campaigning in a losing effort for the man standing in the way of Ukraine getting the aid it needs from Ukraine in Europe anyway. Just extraordinary. David.